Someone says reason. Does someone have that where it says make a defense or make a reason? Anyone else got a different? Ready to explain? Okay, yep. The Greek word there is apologia, or some people might say apologia. And that word means a defense, but not with shields like this or swords. It's a rational explanation. It's something that is explaining and defending the truthfulness of something. And so here's the idea. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. So that's basically love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. So before we start defending the faith, we are absolutely dedicated to Jesus. Amen. So you've seen a pit bull. Pit bulls can grip onto something and they can grip on real tight and hold. Sometimes they'll even hold on after they're dead. And sometimes you got to take a prying stick to get them off. That's how we got to be with Jesus. So before we delve into all these things, because there's a lot of troubled waters once you start getting into questions. And if you're weak in a certain area of your faith, the questions that are raised by outsiders can throw you off course. This is a very real thing. And so holding on to Jesus first and foremost. So there's a confidence that you have in him before you go over here. Or else a lot of times you'll let go of him and start holding on to some other thing. This happens. And apologetics can happen to any Christian, but you got to be ready because you're going to hear more objections to your faith than the average person if this is what you're doing, if you make an effort to do it. I don't mean if you're paid by, very few people were paid to be apologists. But Peter's telling all Christians, be ready to give a defense. Now there's levels, right? You may not want to buy 20 Hebrew Israelite books. I buy a lot more at the house, trust me. But while I'm speaking, after we get to the Bible verse, you're allowed to look at any verse on there and pass them around. These are Hebrew Israelite books. And I brought them so you can see what we're talking about, because tonight we're talking about what they believe. And so to every group, Christ is first. He's Lord. That's a proof text for his deity, by the way. As holy, he is special, unique, and trustworthy. Then you're always prepared. You know, they say, if you're ready, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. You know, you heard that? This is it, because you may not know who's going to ask you the question. You may not know when it's going to come. And if they catch you on the street, Hebrew Israelites, for example, and you're not ready, they'll make a video and they'll say, stupid Christians stumped by the prophets. That's the kind of videos they like to make. They like sensational titles about stumping Christians. But the Bible says we're ready to give a reason, a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. So when we talk about apologetics, it just comes from that passage right there. If you say, I'm an apologist, it means one who's defending the faith. It comes from there. That's where the term comes from. And so that's part of what we're going to do tonight. Last week we talked about the history of a group known as the Hebrew Israelites. This week we're going to talk more about what they believe. We're going to look at a couple of Bible passages and talk about their beliefs. Now, Arthur, do you have your phone? I got to ask someone I can trust with a loud voice and also who will not get distracted by their phone if I ask them to use it for a second. I think you're the guy for the job. Can you Google Marcus, M-A-R-C-U-S, space, Chenault, C-H-E-N-A-U-L-T, C-H-E-N-A-U-L-T. And then do a little reading, and I'm going to talk, and in a minute I'm going to come back to you, and you tell me about who Marcus Chenault is. Can you do that? He can do it. So, it'll be important, you'll see. When we talk about Hebrew Israelites, it is a fast-growing ideology or belief system, which is why I tend to call it Hebrew Israelism. So, Muslims adhere to Islam. Christians to Christianity is the terms that are used. Hebrew Israelites will never say, I hold to Hebrew Israelism. That is a term that we have labeled the idea system. If you meet a Hebrew Israelite, they'll say, I'm just practicing my culture. I'm just practicing. This isn't even a religion. I'm just practicing what my forefathers practiced. It is a religion. It meets the definitions of religion. Now, just because something is a religion doesn't make it false. Sometimes people get caught up on the word religion. I mean, at least in the English translation, James says pure religion is to visit widows, visit orphans, right? The word religion in and of itself doesn't mean something's true or false. It's just describing certain beliefs, right? Hebrew Israelism, it is a religion. It's a growing religion. There's no one center person like the Pope with Roman Catholicism. There's nothing like that. An umbrella with multiple groups, all kinds of different groups. And those books on the table are written by some of them. Like I said, take those down and pass them around. You guys will be enlightened as you thumb through those. Now, as we talk about Hebrew Israelism, it's on the rise. One recent survey estimates 1.5 million or so Americans identify as Hebrew Israelites. A lot of them stay in Christian churches. And the source for that information is something called the Philos Project. They did a survey in connection with Lifeway Research. You could look that up. I've done some videos on it. Okay, now as we talk about that, let's go back to the 60s. Who is Marcus Chenault? Can you help us out?
Marcus Chenault, who killed the mother of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a Sunday service at Ebenezer Baptist Church on 9/9/74.
Now can you put that same name and after it put Hebrew Israelite and see what you get? I said 60s, I meant 70s. So 1974 in Atlanta, Georgia, there was a man who was looking for Martin Luther King Sr. Jr. had already been assassinated. He went into Ebenezer Baptist. I've been there. I went to Atlanta once. They don't use the old building. They got a building across the street they use now. The old one is kind of like almost like a museum. They got a sermon playing by Dr. King, and you can buy some stuff in the gift shop type of thing. But in that building, it's got the sign that you maybe have seen in some pictures. They've got the sign. You go in there. This man was looking for Senior. Senior wasn't there. So he did the next evil thing, which was go after Mother. Why did he go after Mother? Did you find anything?
A man who calls himself Hananiah E. Israel and says he is a spiritual teacher said here today that Marcus Wayne Chenault had been one of his pupils to whom he had revealed his beliefs that black ministers are among the main oppressors of black people.
So, Marcus Chenault was a black Hebrew Israelite. Notice the teacher's name, Hananiah Israel. Chenault was a Hebrew Israelite, and Hebrew Israelites still believe this today, that one of the main problems are black clergy. In fact, a lot of Hebrew Israelites accuse black clergy of being FBI paid informants or agents, like COINTELPRO type thing. Chenault took that basic idea that black clergy are holding black people down from the truth, which is they are the Israelites, according to Hebrew Israelism, to an extreme level and said we need to start getting rid of them. So he made a list, and he was from Dayton, living in Columbus at the time. So he left the campus of Ohio State, so he was a college student, left Ohio State, drove down to Atlanta, went in there, didn't see Senior, saw the mom, and killed her while she was playing the organ. Assassinated her and some other people as well. So, am I saying all Hebrew Israelites are like that? No. But am I saying that there are some Hebrew Israelites like that? Yes. I mean, it's pretty significant that in 1974, Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother was assassinated by a Hebrew Israelite. Most people don't know that. But Marcus Chenault was a real person. He didn't die, and he got locked up for a while. I don't know the current status or what happened, I don't know of that, but he didn't die in the attack. And it came out that he was a Hebrew Israelite. Now, back in 74, wasn't a lot of knowledge or information about them. Still not, but definitely growing. And so let's talk about some of their beliefs today so you can understand who the Hebrew Israelites are better. And before I do the beliefs, let me give you some outward things about sort of maybe how to spot the Hebrew Israelite. If you know somebody who likes to wear fringes, little border maybe down here or underneath their shirt, little kind of stringy things, or a border that has like little rolls on it, almost like the bottom of an old maybe curtain or something like that, that often person will be a Hebrew Israelite. They often wear fringes. If they frequently use the phrase the Most High when referring to God, you might know a Hebrew Israelite. Doesn't mean if you say the Most High, you're a Hebrew Israelite. But Hebrew Israelites seem to prefer calling God the Most High. Sometimes on the internet, abbreviated as TMH. Or they'll use a unique name for God you've never heard, depending on what version of Hebrew they believe. Some Israelites hold to a version of Hebrew called Lashawan Quadash, which is a fake version of Hebrew made up in Harlem in the 70s or earlier. We're not exactly sure. If they believe that, they'll call God Yahweh. Yahweh. God's divine name is, in the Hebrew, it's Yahweh, something called a tetragrammaton. It's 4 Hebrew consonants that in English would transliterate to YHWH. It's almost like a breath. Yahweh. Yahweh. Those are probably most likely the vowels that should be provided. Most likely pronounce it as Yahweh. Jews in the modern era won't use that because they're worried about taking God's name in vain. God never said don't use his name. They take that and they'll say Adonai or they'll say Hashem, which means the name. That kind of depersonalized God. It's overdoing what God said. He just said don't take it as name. He didn't say don't use his name use it at all. But whenever you're in the Old Testament and you see all caps, L-O-R-D, the all caps, not the lowercase, all caps, that means it's the divine name in the Hebrew text of Yahweh. Hebrewites don't believe that. Some of them. They'll sometimes say Yah or Yahweh, or some say Ahaya. It depends on what sect they're with. So if they use an abnormal name for God frequently, might be a Hebrew Israelite. For Jesus, the ones who believe in Lashawan Quadash, which is a non-historical version of Hebrew, they'll say Yahawashai for Jesus, Yahawashai, or sometimes Yeshaya. Those are 2 common names they'll say. So the reason I'm telling you this is if you hear someone with those names, you'll know. Some of the guys will open up their broadcasts and say, in the name of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahawashai, or Kakadash. They'll sometimes say that, which is basically like their opening benediction. Some of the guys will do that. Some of the groups don't do that. They're more loose. They will use God. Depends how much they're trying to kind of convince Christians because it's a little more exotic. But these are ways to spot Hebrew Israelites. Sabbatarian keeping, emphasis on the law. These are things, if you hear someone talking about that, you might know a Hebrew Israelite. And what are some other things? Let's go to the very first belief. And this is what we're talking about tonight. What do Hebrew Israelites believe? We are Israel. Belief number 1. We are Israel. Now, you may say, that's kind of imprecise. Why are you saying we are Israel? Here's why I put it as we. It's them and whatever group they also deem as Israel. So, follow along. Here's the umbrella term of Hebrew Israelism. Think it helps you. Christianity. Christianity is not a particular denomination, right? But then under that, there's different broad understandings. Pentecostal, that's not a denomination, that's a belief within Christianity. Pentecostal, something's called Pentecostalism. Reformed, right? And then there's Baptistic, but there's different denominations of Baptists. You see what I'm saying? So think of that. So big umbrella, then certain understandings of certain passages where they're still all Christians, but there's some differences in belief. Then within that, there's certain denominations going down a 3rd level. So Christianity, Baptistic, Southern Baptist. A particular manifestation, First Southern Baptist Church of Tempe, right? So think now, Hebrew Israelism. That's not a particular group. It's an ideology. Then within that, let's say there's the Tanakh-only Hebrew Israelites, meaning they only hold to the Old Testament. Okay? And then there's sects under that. Or they might be what are called One Westers. One West is an address in Harlem, New York. One West, 125th Street. And it was an influential school in this movement until it split apart in the 90s. And so One Westers hold to different beliefs as opposed to the Old Testament only guys. Then there's ones who almost practice what almost looks like Judaic Christianity. Then there's those who do hold to the New Testament, but they're not with the One West stuff. So sometimes they're called moderates, but the thing is a lot of them aren't very moderate, so I'll just sometimes call them non-campers. I know this can get a little confusing. Why camp? So camp is an Old Testament phrase you'll sometimes see, the calling of the camp, stuff like that. Camp is kind of their term for denomination in a way, roughly speaking. So there's different camps. But then it gets confusing because when they go out on the street, they say they're holding camp. See what I'm saying? There's a lot to learn. It's okay. It's an intro. So who is Israel? Going back to that. There was a reason why I just took you there. Black Americans who are descendant of the slave trade are Israelites. If you're a Tanakh only, if you're a non-camper, That's what you think. So that's kind of black Israelism only. If you're a one-Wester, you believe in something called the 12 Tribes Chart. 12 Tribes Chart is something you might hold out there when you're on 27th Avenue in Indian School. Holding it like a sandwich board, like this. And on it, it's got a list of the 12 tribes of Israel. Name some 12 tribes of Israel. What do you? Okay, good. Good, all right. So check this out. Issachar is one of them, right? Yeah. Issachar, according to the chart, are modern-day Mexicans. Ephraim, right? Modern-day Puerto Ricans. Levi, modern-day Haitians. Simeon, modern-day Dominicans. Judah, modern-day, they like to say so-called black Americans. Benjamin, West Indies, so like Jamaica, stuff like that, right? So there's a 12 tribe chart that identifies a modern ethnic group with one of the 12 tribes. You guys say, well, where did they get that from? Let me just show you one verse real quick. Go to Genesis 49. I don't know if you're going to be quick enough to keep up here because I'm going to have to go through it real fast. We're never going to get through this, but we're going to have a little bit of fun. Genesis 49. Read. Verse 14. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. See, a donkey is a beast of burden, right? That's right. And a beast of burden might carry something, right? And here, this beast of burden is laying down. Read, verse 15. He saw that the resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. See, the land was pleasant. Now, if you go down south of the border, you'll see Mexico's a very pleasant land. And what do they do there after they work? They take a siesta. That's why it says he saw that a resting place was good. Because the siesta is showing this is a characteristic of Issachar. Read. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant to forced labor. Now notice he's got burdens here, right? What are these burdens? Well, if you look, you got to have one on each side. The burden of the Mexican, so-called, really Issachar, was the English and the Spanish. So that is how we know Issachar are the Mexicans. So, Issachar are the Mexicans. Got another one for you. Anybody remember 1 Chronicles? The sons of Issachar? What's it say? You said times? Right here is a picture of the Mayan calendar. And our forefathers used this Mayan calendar to be able to predict the phases of the sun and the moon, or the phases of the moon. Not only that, but it only goes up to 2012. If you look at population stats, 2012 is when the white population in America started decreasing. So they predicted the downfall of Esau with the Mayan calendar, and that's how Issachar discerns the times. Wow. So, Issachar are Mexicans, but not really, everybody. When you put the 12 tribes chart, if you just want to be scientific mildly for a second, there's something called haplogroups. Everybody's got them. 70% of black Americans are under the haplogroup E1, B1A. A lot of times people of Semitic descent have a haplogroup called J, and yada, 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 yada. Well, when you put this 12 tribes chart, you end up putting people of radically different haplogroups in the same chart. And it's sort of a weird thing. Think about Jacob with his 12 sons. You know, he's like, there's my black son, there's my brown son, right? Now they'll say, no, they were more similar back then. That's, you know, those. But I mean, this idea is like you got a Native American. Oh, Gad is Native Americans. Reuben is the Seminoles. So you're right. Now, what do I say that? Belief one is we are Israel. The Tanakh only Israelites say no, it's just black folks. You people are crazy. Why are you? The reason why you put the Mexicans on there is just because you want to marry Mexican women. They'll say something like that. So they debate amongst each other, right? So the Tanakh only guys think the chart's crazy. So don't go to a Hebrew Israelite like, well, I did a class on you and you believe in a chart. They might not believe in the 12 tribes chart. So you know what? What did I tell you to do last time? Don't assume, ask questions. Ask questions. What did Jesus do every time somebody asked him a question? Almost always. He asked a question. So be like Jesus, people. No one wants to hear your 20-minute speech. Ask them questions. Bring it out of them. Should we pay taxes or not? Whose image inscription is on here? Right? Where you get the authority to do those things? John the Baptist, where's his authority come from? You getting it, right? Even when he's mad, could you not tarry 1 hour? Right? Be like Jesus. So, I'm telling you there's a diversity of belief. Understand that. So 12 tribes is different. So their picture of Israel looks different. That's why I say we. So I will sometimes use that against them. I was on the phone with a guy today he's a guy who holds to the New Testament, but he's upset at me. He said, now, vocab, why do you think you get to tell me I'm not Israel? I think it's because you might be secretly a little racist. You don't think black people can be God's chosen. And I say, okay, you believe in the 12 tribes chart? I already knew the answer. Do you believe in the 12 tribes chart? No, I do not. That thing's false, okay? So when Mexicans say they're Issachar, what do you say? They're not Issachar. Well, why do you think that? Is that just because you're racist against Mexicans? So if you know a little bit of their beliefs, you can do some jujitsu. Do you see? But you see how even there I did it with questions? So what did he have to say? Well, I see what you're saying. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Now, the point here is they all have different definitions of who is Israel. Then they have different definitions about this, who can join up with Israel. The so-called moderate non-campers say, Mr. White Man, yes, your forefathers are messed up, and you're not an Israelite, but you can be our brother if you come under us and let us teach you and adhere to the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. We'll call you brother. Just know that your protocol, which is we teach you, right? Because Jude is supposed to be a teacher to the nations, they'll say. The one-Westers, they say, white people are descendants of Esau. There is no repentance for Esau. Haven't you read in Hebrews? It says he sought repentance with tears. There was no repentance. Esau can't repent. Esau's doomed for slavery. If you're white, you're Esau. But you say, oh, it's just white people? It's not just white people. If you're a one-Wester, Chinese people are Moabites. So they have a whole breakdown. Now, I'm going to tell you something's kind of offensive, but listen up. One-Westers only believe this, not these guys. Why do they think they're Moabites? Do you remember what happened with Lot in the cave after Sodom and Gomorrah? What happened? His daughters got him drunk, and then they had a relationship, and then they had some offspring with their dad. And that could produce children that might, I'm not saying they did, but they might, have some issues, right? Well, what do Hebrewites of the one West variety say? That's why Chinese people look retarded, because their forefather was Lot, and he had relations with his daughter. So that's how we know they're Moabites. And Japanese are Ammonites, because the other daughter, remember they did it 2 nights in a row, the other one was the forefather of Ammon. So all those folks are also going to be slaves. It's just Esau, Edomites, are going to get the worst, because Esau is a progenitor to the Edomites in the Bible. So this is what they do. So the guys with the chart have a bigger picture of Israel, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, but other nations can't join up, and they'll read verses that make it seem like only Israel can be saved. Now, before you think that's crazy, I want you to think hard about the book of Acts. Are you thinking? Okay. If you really look at Acts, you can tell frequently by the disciples and apostles' reaction a lot of time to Gentiles coming in that they were not expecting this. Sometimes they weren't even that happy about it. Sometimes they seemed like they didn't think Gentiles were even like on the agenda for God. Peter, he's like, well, and the Holy Spirit interrupts. They start speaking in tongues, and later on he reports it. They started doing what we started doing, so it seems like they're in too. Peter had to battle with that, though. Men from Jerusalem came from James. He stopped eating with the Gentiles. He's like, you guys got those pork sandwiches. I'm going to go back and over here. Paul had to call him out, but even Barnabas was led away. This is a real issue. A lot of them may have thought salvation is only for Israel, unless you want to literally become all the way like Israel. Because if you read the Old Testament, the Bible is always allowed for proselytes to convert full way. But it's a hard process. Leave your people, get circumcised. So Ruth said, your people, my people now. She was a Moabitess. But it's not as difficult. Still not easy. She didn't have to get circumcised. But that's an example. And now she's in fact, she's in Jesus' genealogy because she's related to David, right? As a Gentile. But the men as well. Uriah the Hittite. What's a Hittite? 12 tribe of Israel? One of Israel's neighbors. In fact, pagan neighbors. And yet he was more righteous than the king. That was a man living in Israel. One of his best soldiers. So they could live with them and even go all the way, include circumcision, and to be a full member of the community versus just a stranger sojourner. You had to do that. And then you were part of Israel because that was allowed. In fact, the Bible says when they left Egypt, they went with a mixed multitude. Egyptians went with them. So it's not like it was only for Jews in the Old Testament, but it was more centered on a specific people in a specific land. God had to do it that way. That's how he chose to do it, you could say, to make sure the Messiah was produced through Israel. But now we don't have to go to be in the land. It's not about being in a certain nation or a certain place. It's about being in Christ. And that's what Paul says, and it's not just Paul, but in Galatians 3, those who are Christ are Abraham's offspring. So because you have the same faith as him, see? So the Israelites will use verses that do show God's favor towards Israel, something like that, to try to throw you off, to make you think salvation is only for Israel. The one Westers. The other ones will just show its primacy towards Israel. So every Hebrew Israelite has an ethnic hierarchy in some way. So the one Westers got to turn Cornelius, who's clearly a Gentile. If you read Acts chapter 10, they got to turn him into an Israelite. They got to turn Titus, who's clearly a Gentile, into an Israelite. Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said just
I don't remember now. I don't know. Something important.
It was one of the Greeks. Right before you
The one Westers got to turn Cornelius to an Israelite, even though it describes him as an Italian band. Peter says, shouldn't be coming in your house, right? It's clear he's a Gentile every way, if you read Acts 10. But they can't accept that, you see? So, number one is, we are Israel. So whenever Hebrew Israelite says, why don't you think we're the people of vocab? I say, who? Who do you mean by we? And I let them define it. And if they say it's genetically, they say it's all the people who have the haplogroup E1B1A. Well, do a little bit of research. You'll find out that E1B1A is present in only about 70% of black Americans. Africa is a genetically diverse continent. Not everybody came from the same place and has the same haplogroup. So they tell everybody, but yet genetically, only about 70% of people qualify, if that's their definition. A lot of them don't believe in genetics. They'll say it's white man's science or something like that. But some do get into genetics. It depends what kind of Hebrews that you're dealing with. So I always ask them, who is we? So don't let them just say, ask them who is we. How do they get there? The main way they get there is through Deuteronomy 28. You can even watch a DVD about Deuteronomy 28. Pass that around. That's a very special movie. It's got a pastor killing a Hebrew Israelite in it. It's a low-budget movie made by Hebrew Israelites. Look at that. Deuteronomy verse 28:68. Whole thing. Pass it around. All about Deuteronomy. Why is that important to them? If you read Deuteronomy 28, Yahweh says, I gave you the law. Now keep the law or else you'll be cursed. Sometimes we know the blessing part. Be blessed in the city, but when it comes, when we go. We like that, right? Bless. You guys know that? That's from Deuteronomy 28. Israel, keep my law, you'll be blessed. Did they keep the law? Pretty much no. So instead they got the curses. That's the second part of Deuteronomy 28. Read through them sometime. Messed up stuff. Happened to Israel all throughout the whole pages of the Old Testament. You'll be cannibals. Your king's going to get jacked. Your walled cities are going to come down. You're going to plow for other people. They're going to steal your kids. It all happened. What do you think Hebrew Israelites do with that? That's what happened to black Americans during the transatlantic slave trade. Read verse 68. Deuteronomy 28:68 says you're going to go in ships back into Egypt and then be sold into slavery. Deuteronomy 28:68. That's what it says. In ships back into Egypt. But they came to the United States of America, right? So what do they do with that? Well, those ships were slave ships, but see, Egypt doesn't really have to mean literally Egypt. It means a house of bondage. And the USA is like a new Egypt because it's our house of bondage. So what it's saying, not we're going to go into Egypt. Why would you take a ship to Egypt? By the way, there are examples of taking ships from Israel to Egypt. That's a canard. There were examples of that. In fact, Josephus talks about Romans and Greeks, I believe, I forget which one now, but one of the conquerors of Israel, taking them to the port outside of Alexandria, which is in Egypt. So that did actually happen. Don't let them tell you, why would you ever do that? They did do that. But they'll say Egypt's a house of bondage, so our house of bondage now is the United States of America. That's where those ships are. They're slave ships. And then in the King James Version, it says, you will be sold, but there will be no buyer. It kind of doesn't make sense. How's it a curse if there's no buyer? That's what the King James Version says. The King James Version, some of you are not going to like this, got the grammar a little bit wrong there. It's not because it's a reflexive in the Hebrew, which means that it's essentially something you do unto yourself, basically. That's a quick way to explain it. It's not you'll be sold, it's you will sell yourselves. That's why every modern translation in Deuteronomy 28:68 says you will sell yourselves. Why would you sell yourself? You're poor, you're broke, indentured servitude. That's why it's a curse, there's no buyer. If you're being sold, you'd be like, you'd be in the slave market in North Carolina, right? South Carolina, whatever. No buyer. Yay, that's great. That's not a curse. So that's why it doesn't make sense to say you will be sold. It's saying you will sell yourselves, but there will be no buyer. Saying even when you sell yourselves into indentured servitude, the demand is going to be low for you. You're going to have to sell yourself super cheap even for that. That's what the curse is ultimately saying. And also it says back into Egypt, but they make it the USA. But it's back, so you've already had to have been there. Deuteronomy 28:68 is not about the transatlantic slave trade. Transatlantic slave trade was very bad, but it's not talking about Deuteronomy 28:68. That's not what it's about. That's their key verse, though. But the thing is, the one Westers have a problem because their 12 tribes chart, the people who are of Issachar, so supposedly Mexicans, never fulfilled that verse. So when they tell me that, I'll say, yeah, but you think you could be an Israelite without fulfilling Deuteronomy 28:68, don't you? Because you think Mexicans are Issachar. So what do they do with that? They teach Solomon had a navy, which he did have a navy. But the Navy went out to sea to the tip of South America, got lost, never came back, and then started the South Americans. How did they get there, right? That's the type of thing that they teach. Because what about how did they get there? So that's the type of thing they'll say. So if you look, it's interesting though, if you look at what Solomon brought back during the day when he was bringing stuff in, the Bible actually says this in Kings. It says baboons, peacocks, ivory. Not from South America, right? Those things are not from this side of the globe. They're from this side of the globe. Anyways, so just a quick refutation. But that's a place they'll use Deuteronomy 28. They'll say it only fulfills our people, not those so-called Jews. So that's the next thing we're going to go to. Beliefs of Hebrew Israelites. Number one is we are the Israelites. Number two is the Jews are fakes. The Jews are fakes. They are frauds, ethnic and religious frauds. If you could pass this book around, it's called The Jewish Masquerade. It's all about Jews being frauds. Now, how do they do that? How do they do that? Let's go to Revelation. Let's go to Revelation chapter 2. Let's see, let's go to chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those that say they are Jews and are not, but a synagogue of Satan. That's those so-called fake Jews, but they're really a synagogue of Satan. Revelation 2:9 tells you, right? Well, who's that talking about there, people? Who is Revelation 2:9 talking about? Anybody? What's going on here? Well, there's a similar verse actually in Revelation, chapter 1 as well. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews but are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet. Those fake Jews are going to bow down before us, they'll say. I mean, you're going to look at them and how are these white people going to live over in the Middle East? They get all burnt. It can't be those modern day Jews. It's got to be us. Well, this gets a little bit into Jewish history. First of all, what does Titus 3:9 say? Don't waste your time on foolish genealogies. Hebrew Israelites, God bless their soul, are obsessed with genealogies. Titus 3:9 and other places say it's a waste of time. That's not what we're supposed to be caught up with. When they ask me who are the Jews, so some of you won't like my answer. I believe it's essentially, yes, some of you can drop off right here. Essentially the answer is the church. Galatians 6:16 says the Israel of God, and it's referring to the church. Now you may have a different answer, so you got to work through how you're going to answer that. But the Bible, even wherever you fall in this, Romans 9-11, what's Paul say? Not all who are Israel are Israel. So it's not a matter of an ethnic element in the first place, is it? It's a matter of circumcision outwardly? No, circumcision of the heart. Guess what? This is a biblical idea. In John, do you remember what Jesus says to the Jewish leaders of his day? What does Jesus call them in John 8? What's he say about them? Anybody remember? Jesus is having a little debate here. And it's very interesting what they're talking about. Anybody remember what he says about them? Huh? Well, that is one thing. Yep. And he also says, hold on, no, where did that exact verse go? My goodness. Hold on. Oh, I know what I did. Here. Hold on. I'm going to show you in a second here, but do you remember where? Yeah, what verse is that? Is it on John 7, actually? Do you know the verse top of the head? There, I knew it was somewhere in there. So John 8:39. Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate that. What does he say here? John 8:39. Jesus says, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did, but now you seek to kill me, the man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You were doing the works your father did. Verse 44. You are of your father, the devil. Is Jesus talking to modern day Jews like Seinfeld or something in there? No. Who's he talking to? The Jews of his day in the first century, right? Were they fake Jews? Whoa. Depends what you mean by that. Who does he say their father is? Now, does he mean literally that, well, some of you might believe that. My goodness, I don't know what you believe. But does he mean, do you think that Satan had sex with a bunch of women and produced all these guys? What's he say? He says, because you do the same works as him, right? You're not doing what did Abraham do? Believe. Genesis. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Genesis 22 is the binding. Akedah in Hebrew. That's where the binding of Isaac happens. Way back in Genesis 15, though, Yahweh said, it was counted to him righteousness because he believed. My point, it wasn't after Abraham did something, although his doing was a product of his belief. Back here, he believed and was counted to him for righteousness. It was his belief that was counted as righteousness. So if you have the same faith of Abraham, the Bible says you are following the pattern of Abraham. That means you're truly a son of Abraham versus these guys who are following the devil. So who was the one that God used to write Revelation? John. Put John and Revelation together, it's actually the same theme. Revelation says, synagogue of Satan, saying that the Jews of Jesus' day who persecuted the church because they rejected Jesus are in league with Satan, not with God, even though they would claim to be. That's why they're at the synagogue. He's saying that's like a synagogue of Satan over there. It's not saying they're ethnic frauds in a literal sense. This is the biblical theme. Also, Revelation is written like in the 90s. So they're trying to tell you already the Jewish population had been replaced by a bunch of European-looking people. Sometimes they'll say, no, but it was for the future. I'm saying, so that verse has no meaning to them then, because they don't know. What do you mean, synagogue of Satan? They're like, that guy, they look just like us. They don't, right? Now, this gets a little confusing. I'm going to do the quick version. First of all, I do not believe it ethnically matters, according to the Bible, in the same way that a lot of people think it does about ethnic claims to who's who. You can't even exactly tell anyway, but what happened? 70 AD, the Jews rebelled against Rome. Rome kicked them out. They did it again. 135 AD, Bar Kokhba rebellion. They rebelled, got kicked out, spread all over. Some stayed in Israel. Those are called the Mizrahi Jews. M-I-Z-R-A-H-I. These are Jews who stayed in the Middle East. We don't know them usually. Why? Well, because they stayed in the Middle East. The Jews we usually know in America are usually what are called Ashkenazi Jews. Hebrewites think it's funny to say Ashkenazi Jews. A lot of them think that's funny. Ashkenazi just means Jews who went through Europe and ended up wherever they ended up. Because remember, Jews went everywhere after these rebellions and they were kicked out, right? Some of them went into Europe. What happens? And those aren't the only. There's Sephardic, usually Spain and northern Africa. So there's different, and they look and have practices often somewhat like their cultural neighbors. Why? Intermarriage is allowed in Judaism. Proselytes are allowed in Judaism. So after 2,000 years, you're not going to look exactly the same. That's why when we think of Jews, a lot of times we do think white people. That's not right from 2,000 years ago. You're seeing the product of, a lot of times, Eastern Europeans plus some Semitic peoples. But you got to open up your mind. The Sephardic, the Mizrahi, the Yemenite Jews. Google Yemenite Jews. You'll think, oh, that's probably what Jesus looked like. They don't look like Larry David. They look very different. Why? Because they stayed much closer to that geographical area. Now, this is a basic understanding of what happened. So when we think of Jews white, that's not right, especially back then. But as you go through where you go through, you come out on the other end kind of looking like your neighbors. Now, we're used to seeing Jews from the Eastern European side. I'm not saying I don't have any ethnic ties. What I'm saying is they've been filtered through something. But that's not the only place Jews went. Some went down all the way into South Africa and Zimbabwe, the Limba, and they look somewhat like their African neighbors. Now, they're the exception to the rule. Hebrewites want you to think it's kind of all over the continent. Not true. And by the way, if they're in South Africa, that's not really relevant to West Africa, which will make it relevant to the transatlantic slave trade. So the Limba having Semitic DNA does not equal the West Africans have Semitic DNA. Do you see? That's bizarre. This Limba tribe in South Africa, some of their haplogroups, especially the J, match up with Ashkenazi. You could have Woody Allen next to a Limba, look totally different, and they would share a unique haplogroup. Sometimes these are what's called population studies, meaning in any given population, nobody's everything. Nobody's the same exactly, right? So are there people who are descendants of would say I'm a Jew who are actually descendants of converts or super watered down? That's most likely true. Some who may have almost be like fully Eastern European, for example. Yes, and it's very difficult to trace all this stuff exactly. But when you do population studies, are there people who have what's called Semitic DNA? Yes. Now that's even tricky, the Semitic DNA thing, because Arabs have very similar DNA. Why? Well, in general, Esau, Ishmael, you see what I'm saying? These are folks related to them, so there's not a lot of distinctions. There are some distinctions, specifically something called the Cohen modal haplotype. And that is something that's distinct to people who have last names dealing with the priestly clan, Cohen, Levi, these names. A lot of times those folks have a unique signature that seems to indicate they're descendants of Aaron. Now, just because your last name's Cohen doesn't mean you've got it though. Sometimes you get the last name without being it. So again, this is super complicated. Hebrewites like to smash all the complication out of the way, trick you and say they're all fakes. Do you think white people were running around back then? Now the Jews of Jesus' day, they probably didn't look white because they hadn't been dispersed yet. You can get a little bit of how they look. Check this out. By looking at Egyptians of the day. Well, why would I do that? How can I look at Egyptians from the 1st and 2nd century? Well, Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. But if you think Egyptians equals someone who looks like, say, what would be called a Nubian, you might be wrong. How do you know? The Egyptians of the 1st century like to do something. What do? Painted their faces, an artist, on the outside of their sarcophagus. It's called the Fayum mummy portraits, F-A-Y-U-M. And you can see what they look like. And they're dark brown, some a little lighter, some a little darker. We can see what modern Egyptians, I'm not saying they're Jews, I'm saying 1st century, 2nd century Egyptians look like. Well, if you generally know what they look like, you're generally close to maybe what some of the Israelites of the day look like, because Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. But they try to say, well, aren't Egyptians African? So therefore, Israelites are black too. But if you look at Egyptians of the 1st century, they weren't black like that. And when the Egyptians portrayed themselves, even on their walls back in the day, they portrayed Nubians as darker than them, and they portrayed the Semites as lighter than them. Now, Hebrewites would disagree with a lot of what I'm saying, but I've looked into this because I look into their claims. You can do the same thing, and you'll see, okay, so the world is bigger than black and white. Don't think like Jim Crow. If you think, if they're not black, they must be white. If they're not white, they must be black. What are you, crazy? What are you talking about? People didn't even think that way prior, really, to Jim Crow. We're stained a lot of times by the product of American racism, this whole one drop and all this kind of stuff. The world is not like that. I mean, do you know anyone from the Middle East? What are they? Are they black or white? Doesn't even really make sense to talk that way, right? What about super dark Sicilians? What are they? You know, there's all these kind of questions. So that kind of thinking is silly, but that's what the Hebrewites will try to do. So hear what they'll say. They will say, we are true Israel. Very important belief. The Jews are frauds or fakes. Now look, for me, I don't sit around defending because I'll say, look, whether or not any Jewish person is descended from Jacob, they need to know Jesus. That's my emphasis with them, and so do you. They're kind of, a lot of Hebrewites are sort of obsessed with modern day Jews. It's like this. They think the pie's not big enough for both of them. You know the old, this town's not big enough for both of us, right? That's how they seem to think. So if they're legit, we're not legit, we're legit, therefore they're frauds. So there's a strong anti-Semitism in Hebrew Israelism, regardless of what they say. They'll say, oh, well, how can I be an anti-Semite? I'm a Semite. Well, remember, they're begging the question. It's not really likely they are Semitic, number one. Second, you can be self-hating or hate other people who are descended from a similar family tree, so it's kind of a silly argument. In fact, on a Hebrew Israelite reckoning, if white people are the descendants of Esau and black folks are the descendants of Jacob, the twins, right? So if Jacob's descendants are Semites, who else are Semites? White folks, according to their logic. I'm not saying in reality, people, okay? So you can be anti-Semitic because most Hebrew Israelites ain't feeling white people, I'll just put it that way. So they're anti-Semitic towards white folks because they think they're Semites. See what I'm saying? So, a lot there. This is why you see why Hebrew Israelites can trick somebody, because they make a bunch of false claims. You may not be aware of what's happening back here, and then they'll say something, show you a couple verses, and you are... Let me show you a verse they might show you. This relates to the next thing. So, we are Israel, Jews are fakes, and the Bible is a black book. The Bible is a black book. Go to Revelation chapter 1. I'll show you what I mean. Now, if Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, and we know what Jesus looked like, he's from the tribe of Judah, most likely we know what a lot of other Judites look like, and therefore a lot of other Israelites. And if they look like you, then you might be descended from the tribe of Judah. Let me show you what I mean. Revelation chapter 1. Then I turned to see, verse 12, John speaking, the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in the furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. And his face was like the sun shining in full strength. Now again, they'll usually use the KJV, which translates some of these things slightly different, but the sense is the same. Let me show you what they'll do here. It says the hairs of his head were like wool. What people on the planet have woolly hair? So-called black man. Jesus had kinky hair, not the straight dog hair that white people have. Not only that, it says that his feet were getting burned in the fire. When something is burnt, what color is it? It's black. Now how could he have black feet and a white face? Clearly he was a dark man because his feet looked like they were burnt. Anybody see what I did there? What was wrong with what I just said? Tell me.
At one point you're saying the hair is a certain kind of woolly white, and the end is talking about something burned to black.
Well, yeah, a black man with black feet with nappy hair. So what? What's wrong with what I just said?
It's the descriptions about the color. It's not about the style. So.
Style. What's that mean? Style.
As far as the curly wool.
Yeah, you might say texture.
Yeah, texture.
Well, how do you know that? He's right, by the way. How do you know that?
It says the hairs of his head were white, and then it uses the next words to describe the white.
Well, isn't white wool kinky? This is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing they do, right? Yeah, the snow's talking about the color, but this is talking about the texture and the color. Right? Have you seen the Malcolm X movie? He stands up and debates the chaplain with this verse. Denzel stands up and says, that picture, who's that guy back there? It's a white Jesus, and the chaplain's like, he has no answer. So if, you have a white Jesus, then you might be in trouble. But a black Jesus doesn't necessarily mean the truth either. Now, if you mean black as in non-white, okay, but that's not what people mean when they say black. Let's look at this verse real quick. Let's just say Jesus was black. If he was, this isn't the place to prove it. Because what does it say? It says his hair was white like white wool. So your mom is fat. How fat is she? So fat she doesn't walk, she just slides across the floor, right? Something like that. Well, here it's saying white. How white is it? Like wool. Well, it says white wool. It specifically tells you what kind of wool it is, right? It's white. So then it says like snow. So sometimes I'll say, what texture is snow? You see? So it's not talking about that. Now, why would it say Jesus has white hair? I thought Jesus was like 30. I don't get it. This is not Jesus on an average Sabbath. This is a symbolic representation of his deity. What do you think the white wool symbolizes? Purity and or wisdom. The gray hair, right? The white hair. Hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. Doesn't it sound symbolic? What ethnic group has? They'll say, some of them, this is how the black man looks when he drinks. Jesus is coming back pissed off. Filled with drink, red wine, right? I'm not joking, by the way. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. Now again, if you read it in the KJV, you'll say, as if they burned. It does not say as if they were burnt. They try to put it in the past tense. Even in the Greek, the tense is present. What does something look like when it's burning? Say metal burning. What would it look like? Right. Which kind of matches the white hair, which matches the golden sash, which matches flaming fiery eyes, which matches the 7 golden lampstands. This is bright, shiny Jesus, kind of like the Mount of Transfiguration, that little glimpse of his deity. This is a picture of Jesus' majesty. What's coming out of his mouth? A sword. Everything about this is shiny, bright, the way God is portrayed. This is identifying Jesus as God. So I say, you take a passage about Jesus' majesty, glory, divinity, and turn it into a passage about his ethnicity. Do you see what's happening? You got to read the whole passage. Everything in here is Old Testament symbolism. For example, if you had to guess, you're a Hebrew Israelite, and I said his voice was like the roar of many waters, what would Hebrews like how would they maybe use that? If they're really having a good day, how would they use that one? Voice like the roar of many waters. I'll give you a hint. James Earl Jones. He had a deep voice of a black man like Barry White. But if you read the Old Testament and look for that phrase, voice of many waters, think about going back, right? What would be one of the loudest things you could hear and still be alive? Waterfall. Like, ever been to Niagara? You know what I'm talking about. This is, in the Old Testament, a way God is portrayed as when he speaks, and his voice was like the roaring or rushing of many waters. So when it says Jesus has that voice, it's saying when Jesus speaks, he speaks with the voice of Yahweh. It's a way to identify him as God. That's the Old Testament background. You should know it's symbolic right away because he's got what in his hand? 7 stars? Oh, Jesus must be Japanese. He's got ninja stars, right? No, this has to do with the brightness and shining. And guess what? Verse 20, as for the mystery of the 7 stars, oh, so John gives you the code that you saw in my right hand and the 7 gold lampstands, the 7 stars of the angels, the 7 churches. Verse 20 tells you there's a code there. Now, why does he reveal those 2? I believe it's because the rest are obvious from the Old Testament. Those 2 are not obvious from the Old Testament. So he's like, I'm going to tell you these 2. The rest you can know by studying the Old Testament. So that's why there's 2. And it also lets you know, oh, this is symbolic. Jesus doesn't literally have 7 stars in his hand, right? And everywhere he goes, there's 7 golden lampstands surrounding him like some kind of shield. Do you see? But if you're out on the corner real quick and you hear it, Jesus had woolly hair and black feet. He's not white. He's like us. Go. So, that is one example to show this is a black book. That's not the only one. We don't have time to cover the other. They have a whole panorama they call the color scriptures. The color scriptures. That's what they call them. Another one says, oh, my skin was black. And then right after the verse it says, because of the famine. So they'll do it and I'll say, well, it gives a reason. If you're black, you don't need a reason. Here it's because of the famine. It's saying why. It doesn't actually say black, it says like darkened or whatever. So they'll take anything like that, right? And so if you're not ready, so you got to read the context. You can't. But again, you got to stop and understand. The vocab's not here to comfort you to tell you Jesus looked like a European with a pointy nose and thin lips. That is not the point. That's not the point at all. Painting Jesus like a European, that's just a thing Europeans did, and it became prominent because of Western media. This is not saying that. The world is different than that. If you look up Iraqi Jews, Yemeni Jews, most likely that's how Jesus ethnically looked. The Bible never describes him. In this passage, if he was the way they wanted to look, this isn't the place to go look for it. So I'm not saying he looked like a European. The Bible doesn't say exactly, but most likely he would look like his neighbors. And what do they look like? We have some evidence, fine mummy portraits of Egyptians, if you're so curious. But you can even see descendants who stayed in the area roughly like them. They don't look like white folks. They don't look like black folks if you're just using those kind of categories. So we got to get out of the Western mindset and thinking it's like that and say Jesus is who he is. And that's not really any of our main concern. If Jesus came back and we were wrong and he looked like Isaac Hayes, I'd be okay with that. It'd be a little surprising, but it wouldn't bother. Why would it bother? Who to bother? What? They act like, oh, you wouldn't worship Jesus. If he was, no, it's not about that. They want to make it about that. Oh, now that we've come to the truth, now it doesn't matter. Now it doesn't matter, right? They'll say something like that. So we don't have time to go. There's actually 10 beliefs I wanted to cover today. We only got to do 3, which is we are Israel, the Bible's so-called black book, and what is the other one I think I said? No, I forgot what I said. Oh, Jews are fakes. Those actually are probably the biggest 3. And sometimes you'll see this come up. Say you're a white guy and you're out there trying to talk to them. Oh, you can't even understand our book. You shouldn't even be reading the Bible. You're not an Israelite. Sometimes if they say that, I'll say, the Jews of Jesus' day, they were Israelites, right? Yeah. Did they understand the book properly? So being an Israelite doesn't guarantee understanding the book. It's a silly thing. Like there's some kind of decoding there based on your ethnicity. Even just going with their assumption. I'll stop there and do questions.
Well, it's not so much a question as a statement.
I'll do statements and comments.
I haven't been to Bible college. I'm not a theologist.
This is your first class.
But I will say this, it seems that they're banking on the ignorance.
Oh, yes, they are.
And the Bible says that my people perish because of a lack of knowledge.
Which means the so-called black man doesn't know he's of Israel. Therefore, he lives like the white man taught him, keeping Christmas instead of the holy days. And that's what it means when it says, my people, who are the Israelites, perish for lack of knowledge. We don't know who we are, sis.
But that just sounds like blah, blah, blah.
No, it doesn't. That's because you've been trained by those Christian pastors. You probably were raised in the church.
Why do you do that, Nicole?
Why does your pastor not tell you these verses? Because he knows the truth, but he's hiding it from you. Read.
They're not really listening.
That's because you've been brainwashed by the Christian church. What can you teach me? Besides, you're a woman. Where's your husband? This is all things they'll say to you, by the way. So if you don't have thick skin, keep it moving and just pray for me.
Yeah. So I have 2 questions. One is, for them to say the Jews are fake.
Ethnic and religious imposters.
Right. I want to get at the Jews are the apple of God's.
Yeah, that's the so-called black man. Thank you for admitting.
Okay. So they're just going to make it about, oh my God, the Jews are fake, but they aren't fake.
Yeah, because they have done the worst case of identity theft in the history of the world. And that's why Revelation 2:9 says so-called Jews. Read!
So if they live in Israel,
They stole our land.
and
They're squatters.
and God's going to protect Israel to the
Is there peace in that land? They've been protected when they get blown up at Pizza Reese's? They're protected?
So I'm saying, are all of, bear with me, y'all black Jews going to move back to Israel before the end times comes? Because that would be
God's going to transport us there.
transport you.
Yes, so if you're a one-wester, the chart guys, not the other guys, a chart guy, you believe that UFO sightings are actually chariots scoping out the land that will beam you up and take you to Israel while there's thermonuclear destruction upon America, and that's what the lake of fire is America burning.
Wow. So that's
Here,
perfectly,
like this book, which I'll pass around now.
that's a perfect lead into my next question, but before I say that, for anybody that just wants the news, just yesterday, the federal government released 50 sites, they're showing the actual UFO sightings that Navy pilots, all these pilots have seen. Every once in a while they they'll put it on the news like, oh, just this one.
Yeah, they would use that. They would say that's the black angels and the black UFOs coming to get us.
Saying the timing of you saying what you just said, and they just showed, yep, we really have all that data, and there's about 50 of them that we can't explain.
Now, we need to be critical thinkers here, ladies and gentlemen. UFO means literally unidentified flying object. Let's just say it was a flying saucer. Does that tell you who's inside of it? So Christians got to be critical thinkers. If you see a ship, you don't know who's in there, where it came from. And most likely, now some of you won't like this. That's okay. We can have different opinions, right? Hopefully I've helped you so far so you don't hate me. Most of those, from what I've looked at, the main concern of the government is they're worried about experimental craft from enemies. Some do not seem to be able to be explained with the laws of physics. Perhaps those may be, it's possible, hypothetically, but I don't see how you can say you know for sure, demonic manifestations or something like that. But the problem is with a lot of Christians, they make all of them instead of looking for other explanations first. I think when you look at a lot of them, it seems like, the crazy thing is some of this, who would have thought we'd have space stations and all this? So if you think that's anti-gravitational equipment, real life experimental stuff, remember, they're simply unidentified. And even if you saw a craft, you don't know who's in there. It's a logical fallacy to say, look, craft, therefore Martians. It doesn't actually logically follow. We gotta think that. It also doesn't follow say, look, craft, therefore demons. It's unidentified for a reason.
Just to end that and then transfer to my next question. They actually did say, oh, we think it could be this or this, and one of their things was new technology coming
Yeah.
from other countries.
Yes.
Meaning
So
outer space.
I do not hold to everything he teaches. There's a guy named Michael Heiser, Heiser. I was on a show once. We are cool. I do not agree with everything he says, but he's one of the most sane people on the internet about this. So he talks about a lot of these phenomena and stuff. Like he talks about Bigfoot, all that. But he's an Old Testament scholar. I don't mean a self-taught. I mean a guy who really knows Hebrew. He's a legit Heiser. I do not agree with everything he talks about. Okay, like his divine counsel stuff. I don't think he's right on that. But he's a very smart guy and he's pretty sane about the UFO stuff. So he's an interesting guy to look at. Yeah.
So, I gotta go back to one of your things. I'm gonna lose it. Oh, I want to know, are you at all familiar? There is I'll call it a white version of,
Anglo-Israelites?
British Israel.
Yeah, I talked about them last week a little bit. That's why I use the term Hebrew-Israelism, because prior to them, about 100 years, were the folks who practiced Anglo-Israelism. Now, the Anglo-Israelism idea is kind of slowed down, but they still exist. Herbert Armstrong was a big proponent of this. Or I think Arthur Murray was too. Or Arnold Murray was that guy? He used to be from Arkansas. Arnold Murray, yeah, he was into this stuff. Yeah, Arnold Murray, sorry. Arnold Murray. And some of the Christian identity people, these are like the stereotypically like guys with hats and mustache and cowboy boots. Oh, sorry, but I didn't mean, kind of look like him, who go isolate themselves and stock up. I did that on purpose. I'm just teasing you. Who stock up guns and go out there and live by themselves, and the government comes crashes their party and they have a whole big thing. A lot of those are Christian identity folks. Some of them think that. Because a lot of them are anti-Semitic. Have you ever wondered, well, how do they worship Jesus? They have a whole different view of what a Jew is and all this kind of stuff. So that's a thing, yeah.
Somebody that I know had asked me about it's called World Church of God.
Mm-hmm.
So I started researching. I did the
Worldwide, Herbert Armstrong.
Garner Armstrong, and I recognized
Keys to the kingdom and all that stuff.
plain truth, which is not plain.
Yeah, it usually has a picture of the British flag and the United States flag.
That was what I want to ask. They say that Britain was we're Manasseh.
Ephraim and Manasseh. So instead of the curses of Deuteronomy 28 describing the black experience, the blessings of Deuteronomy 28 for these folks describe the British Empire experience. So they use the front of it. So then there's asked Hebrewites, why is it illegitimate to use the front if you're going to use the back? Maybe the Anglo-Israelites are right. No, I don't really think they're right. Right? Of course they're not right. I mean, I've talked to some of these folks teach that King James was like he sits on the throne of David, or he sat on the throne of David. And sometimes they'll even teach the modern monarchs or descendants of David. The Hebrewites, on the other hand, have a different view. They think King James was black. I'll pass that book around with the black King James. I tell them, you're right. King James, LeBron. He is black. But, yeah.
The Hebrew roots movement, are they like a kissing cousin of black Hebrew?
Oh, yeah. No, they are. So, a lot of times when people get caught up sort of in law-keeping and Old Testament overemphasis, now you may not agree, but we got to have proper biblical interpretation. The new interprets the old. Now, with that being said, most of us probably don't know the Old Testament well enough. It's difficult. It's a lot of books in there. What's in Zephaniah? Oh, you see what I'm saying? It can be tricky, right? What's in Obadiah? What's in Nahum? What's in Habakkuk? What's in those guys? There's a lot there, right? It's all relevant, but it has to be interpreted through the new. We don't throw away the old. We just interpret it in its proper context, which means the Messiah has come. So with that being said, a lot of times when you start doing this, you're getting closer to Hebrew Israelism because the overemphasis on Old Testament, overemphasis on the law, and then sometimes you move away from Trinitarianism. You get away from salvation by grace. And then there's an emphasis a lot of times on who is ethnically Israel. So it's easy then to fall into the trap, well, you want to be Israel then. So you'll find some way to make yourself Israel. So I know Hebrewites who did the whole Hebrew roots thing before moving on to Hebrew Israelism. That can happen. In fact, Hebrewites get a lot of converts out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church because of some of their things they hold to. And so, yes, but the white Hebrew roots guys kind of fight sometimes online, not too much really, like online fight with other Hebrewites because they have these similarities, but then they have these differences. So it'll be a white guy with a beard saying, here's where the Hebrewites are wrong, and then, but I think they're under the spectrum. And there's another group called the Israel-only folks, and they can be of any color. They'll say salvation was only for Israel, and some of them are what's called full preterists, so they think that no one else could even be saved. The door is shut on salvation. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. The internet, like, this shooter recently in Buffalo, I read the 180-page manifesto. If you want to have a dark day, look at my live stream. I did it yesterday. I went through the whole thing. In there's all kinds of stuff from all kinds of conspiracy theories thrown together that he believes in and holds. In fact, he talks about the Jews, it's like 20-some pages of stuff, and says they're partially descendant of Edomites. And he's after black folks because they're replacing the white population, so they shouldn't be here, they should be back there, type of thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of these ideas get aggregated in different places on the internet. And I'm a free speech absolutist. Some of you are like, well, they should shut down all the websites. Well, then they're going to shut down you next. The real idea, in my view, because who gets to decide who gets to shut down what? Well, whatever's dangerous. Well, Christianity is dangerous. You hate gays. Therefore, we'll shut you down. This is how it goes. So battle with the realm of ideas, not just saying, arrest them and do this. That's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is in the realm of ideas. 2 Corinthians 10, let's end with that verse. And then if we got to do the questions, let me kind of take them. I'll chill over here on the side and we can talk because I want to make sure you guys don't go way past normally when you go. Although I do like talking to you, and we could do this for a long time, as you can tell. I will be here next week. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Let me read this. This is the Apostle Paul. Look what he writes here. I got to start here in verse 2. No, I'll start there, verse 3. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. However, this says we are waging war, if you catch the gist, just not according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare, that means we have weapons that we're in warfare, but not according to the flesh, are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. So they do have power to destroy, but it's strongholds. These are demonic strongholds. These are ideas even. Watch the next verse, you'll see what I'm saying. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. Notice the military language. Here's a stronghold. You destroy it, you tear it down, and then you take it captive. This is like military language for the battle of ideas. Now, he's talking about in a church context, but this applies out there as well. There's other verses similar. But this is where we do battle as Christians, not reinstituting the Inquisition or trying to get the government on our side. That's the cheap, easy way. The right way is the truth. The truth. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to pray, and I'll be around to talk. I don't have any more of my Isrealites books on me because I didn't know you guys were going to want them. I brought 2, and they're gone already. However, to sell, I do have a magazine. This is a magazine. I bought a bunch of copies of this because it's a great article here on Isrealites. It's like a one-stop shop. $5 for this magazine, just for the article. There's other good stuff in here. It's an Apologetics magazine, but a really good article. So I do have that, and another one that has some similar stuff in here. So those are $5 each. And then my new book, Street Level Apologetics, which talks about how to do urban apologetics, and has a little bit about Isrealites in here. This one's 15. You don't have to buy anything. I'm just telling you it's available if you want some resources. There's stuff online too, but it's just stuff that I have with me. So let me pray and let's close. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for every man, woman, boy, girl here. We pray, God, that we're challenged, but also excited because we realize we have a chance to study your word more. It's not just about learning error. No, it's about learning the truth so we can detect error. God, keep us, hold us, as we know you do. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Amen. Any other announcements? I'll see you next week. Maybe here's what we should do. Because we're talking about week 3, week 4. I think I should do another continuation of what they believe, because if you notice when I did it, I was doing some refutation along the way. The last week I'm going to probably focus on refutation, but I think I should do what Isrealites believe continued, because I have more we need to get to, because we're touching the surface. But this is not irrelevant. We're not learning about an ancient group. We're learning about a modern group on the rise. Before I started, you don't have to raise your hand, but 2 or 3 people came up and said, I know this person. This has affected me personally. I know that person. So this is a very real thing. Jehovah's Witnesses are still around. We still need to learn about them. That's true. However, they're not on the rise anymore. Their ascendancy is over. I'm not saying they're going to disappear, and Satan could always bring them back. Don't call it a comeback. We don't know. But they're on the decline at this point. Hebrew Israelism is it's one of the problem is they don't have the same kind of stats or groups that you do for more traditional religions, so it's more difficult. Like we know Islam's growing. We know that Roman Catholicism in lots of places, not the whole world, but in lots of places is shrinking. We know Christianity, especially in the West, is shrinking, but growing in other places, Africa, Southeast Asia. Hebrew Israelism, they don't have the same kind of stuff, but all the data we do have indicates, and personal experience and online activity, they're growing. So this is future preparedness as well as people you may know, as well as yourself. You see, we're dealing with important issues here, right? It's not trivia. So I'm going to close, and if you want to talk, here I am. Oh, you got to check out these books. I wish I could have shown you more of these books. These are a bunch of Hebrews-like books. I got Hebrews-Lights for Dummies, the Hebrews-Light Manifesto, the Polygamous Papers, Proof Jesus is Not God, Hell is a Social Construct. You guys feeling this? These great titles? Any other announcements? Because I am done, because I know you guys usually end around this time.
Thanks, man.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Hey, how you doing, man?
Doing good.
Good vibes only.
So I'm just wondering where the all the races come from? All the races have like different kinds of names.
Oh yeah, you're great. It's a great question. All the different names